8 years, and working within a department called Strategy and Analysis. And a couple of years ago, I had the great fortune to receive a scholarship from Sven Tyréns Foundation to start doing my PhD. I'm doing that at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology, within the Department of Urban and Regional Studies. Being an economist from the beginning, this is a bit strange to me, but I'm turning slowly into an engineer. So you will have to bear with me. Right now, I'm somewhere in between. But I like that. And for me, this about city soul is becoming a more and more complex concept, which is what I've learned from others, professors, that's the way things happen when you are a PhD candidate. It gets more complicated, and then suddenly, a year or so before you get examined, it's all clear. So I'm hoping for that. But right now, I'm like in the middle. It's the start of my studies. So I will give you some examples, and I will share with you some of my insights, some of my key questions. And hopefully, you can give me some feedback, maybe during lunch or so. And hopefully, I can give you maybe some new knowledge regarding this subject. When it comes to this, I mean, big cities like the ones Louise told us about, I mean, they can appear very similar when it comes to jobs, their ability to offer jobs, income, education, supply of commerce, of goods and services. But they also are, each and every one of them are unique. And it is this uniqueness, and I think you all kind of know what I'm talking about, this uniqueness that I'm interested in. And the aim of my current project, which is called City Soul, is to get a deeper understanding about this uniqueness, but from an urban planning point of view. And that is very important. As you will see, this is something that is discussed in different research domains, but I'm having my urban planning glasses on, and that's my perspective, and that's how I'm gonna approach this. And it all started really a couple of years ago, both my interest in city soul and my interest in urban planning from a more academic point of view, with a project called Urban Trends that I was happy to be running due to funding from the Sven Tyréns Foundation again. I was working 100% as a consultant by then, and we did this project, an international study where we actually did a global trend study. We had a case study of a total of 10 megacities around the world where we did on-site interviews, among other things. And we did a survey in Sweden covering 5,000 Swedish residents. And also, of course, a lot of statistical analysis on top of that, and workshops and discussions within different reference groups, both from the academia and from the business sector. So this was a very huge and comprehensive project. And what we learned from that, what I learned from that, if you condense it a lot, because it was a lot of material. But if you condense it, we sort of summarized our learnings, the result, into 4 concepts. 4 concepts that each and every one of them has a number of success factors for cities, both now to be attractive now, and for cities to be even more attractive in the future. And I think you will recognize most of them. I mean, diversity is not something new. It has been acknowledged by economists for several decades that this is something very important for cities. But our conclusion was that it will become even more important in the future. And also sustainable development, I don't think I need to comment on that. I mean, it's maybe the most discussed matter right now when it comes to cities' challenges in the future. And the third one, collaboration, concerns both, it might be a strange word, but it concerns both the importance for municipalities and smaller areas to cooperate and collaborate as the regions are growing due to urbanization. But it also kind of pinpoints the need for cities to enhance the ability to create social networks. As Louise was talking about, that's what cities are all about, to create social networks, or for us people anyway. So that's also some type of collaboration. You can also see it as connectivity between different parts in the city, so infrastructure is a big part of collaboration. But the fourth one is the one that is my focus today. And so how come we found this strange notion of city soul as one of the big conclusions from this study of urban trends? Well, we did a lot of interviews, as I said, and most of them mentioned in one way or another some type of feature or characteristic of their city that you could refer to as city soul. For example, we have some quotes here, and for example, the architects talked a lot about the place and how the place is connected to the culture and the roots and the history of the place and the people there. And we also had, like within tourism, people talking about how you go from sightseeing to life-seeing now, and people don't want to experience cities physically that much, but they want to get to learn people there. We also have a lot of stories about the 7 villages that is the base for London, and how that has affected the different parts of London, and how it still is very particular for the culture and lifestyle in those parts. And histories about Sydney and how they use histories in their marketing to market Sydney to other parts of the world. So it was a lot of different things that made us acknowledge this fact, that there's something there that is not, that is quite qualitative in its character, but still very connected to the city, the physical elements of the city. And together with the other results from the global trend study, that we have a intensified global competition among cities, where cities need to market themselves in order to achieve the best population, or the most creative ones, or the tourists. And we also have seen changing motives for migration, that people are still, of course, one of the most important reasons for moving to another city is job or income or housing, but more and more people are actually paying attention to how that city is appearing to them. Is it a lovely city? Is it somewhere that I can be happy? And these are being seen now in research. And also in this Western world, where we are fortunate enough to be able to fulfill our very personal needs. So this individualism and personality, this hunt for unique experiences, also put the pressures on cities to become become more unique and be able to market the more unique sides. So this was my entry to this subject. And if the city soul is possible to define, and if it can be connected to city attractivity or city success, then this tells us that it should be quite important to analyze this further. But then, in order to define something, does it exist? And of course, something can exist, but it can be only in the eyes of the beholder. Take love, for example. I think all of us here would say that, of course, love exists. It absolutely, very much, undoubtedly exists. But is it something that could be measured upon a united scale? Can we make research on it? Is it observable in that kind of way? So it could be that the soul also, like love, is mostly in the eyes of the beholder. But let's see what other says about this. So I had to go back to the literature and look around. And being an economist, of course, I started with the economics. And there you find some people, the old guys, distinguished guys like Charles Thibault here, had quite basic models for how we choose location and how we, he called it vote with our feet, choosing city depending on what they offer us in terms of goods and services, utilities, and how much it will cost us to live there. But he didn't really bother about the qualitative parts of life, I mean the soul, so to speak. He took the hard facts. And then the guys following him, they included life quality, but more in the residuals of the model, like being the rest. And slowly, economics like Richard Florida has been able to even further coming into this subject of qualitative factors influencing us. And then you have to go further. You have to look at the architectures, you have to look at the geographers, the psychologists, the sociologists. And what you find when you do that is that actually all of them, in one way or another, partly or totally, touch upon different concepts that are related to this that I would call city soul. And you can see all this essence of place, place attachment, genius loci, identity, city branding. These are all known concepts within these research domains. So in order to kind of relate them to urban planning and finding a more applicable method or applicable theory for this, you need to connect them to each other, and you need to connect them more to the physical elements of the city, I think. And I believe that it will need a new concept. So, and I will call that concept city soul. However, it could be something else. It could be better to call it identity. I mean, soul is something that you probably have your own very personal interpretation of, and it's hard to use that. But I think it's a need for this concept anyway. And then the next question, of course, what is the city soul? What characteristics is it related to? And can it be related to attractivity or success of a city? And these guys and women did not have that many answers to this. So you can see bits and pieces, of course. You can see some physical aspects among the architects. You can see some social aspects among the sociologists. And you can see some economic factors among the economists, and so on. But really not that much. You can get pieces of the puzzle here. But going back to my experience from the urban trend study, I have quite a clear hypothesis about what this is. And it has to do with both very sensible issues, like when you experience the light, late summer night in Stockholm, which is extraordinary, or the architecture in the Gaudí's architecture, for example, in Barcelona, or the very, very special quarters of Golden Guy in the middle of Tokyo. So you have these elements in the city that are very unique and that give you a very special feeling about that city. And also, we found that symbols and symbolic buildings and art in a city can be very important in the terms not only being something beautiful that you experience, you go there, but they also carry stories about the city. Stories that tells us something about the history, the lifestyle, the culture. For example, this is one of my favorite stories, and I'm sorry if you have heard it before, because I love to tell it. It's the story about Hachiko, which is quite a small symbol, a small statue in Tokyo, outside Shibuya station, one part of Tokyo. And immediately when you come to Tokyo, you get to know this story. You say you must go to Hachiko, the statue of Hachiko, and you should touch his paws, and that will bring you luck, and so on. And you start wondering, what is this story about this Hachiko? Who is he? What is this dog? And it's a story about a very loyal dog who waited for the man who owned him every day in this train station. And as this man suddenly dies, the dog stays on at the station area, and eventually people start feeding him, try to give him away, adopt him to somebody, but he comes back and he dies in that area. And they raised this statue, which is very, very nice, but also carries a lot of the core values of Japanese traditions, like loyalty and trust. So it's a great story, and it of course, there are many examples around the world on this kind of. So I believe also that kind of symbols and symbolic buildings or art could actually be important to the soul. Okay, so building upon the clues, the pieces of the puzzle given by all the other research that have been done for many, many years, like the economists and the sociologists and all those. And upon this experience that I have from the urban trend study, which I just told you about. So this is my hypothesis, that the city soul is something that is related to both the natural and the built environment of the city. It is related to the local lifestyle, the culture and the history, to the social capital of the people living in the city, and to also culture, arts, entertainment, recreation, and sports. And I believe that it is, you can be able to relate it to city activity in terms of residential satisfaction, for example, loyalty and pride. It is, however, it's really hard to decide in which way the causality goes. So is it that you are proud of your city and that kind of strengthens the city soul, or is it the other way around, that a strong soul, a strong identity in a city kind of pushes up your pride, makes you more proud of the city? I don't know that. So going from this, I've done a survey in order to kind of test this hypothesis a little bit, and it covers about 2,500 Stockholmers, people from Gothenburg, Malmö, and Umeå, so 4 Swedish cities, and they have answered a questionnaire about a lot of questions about the city. Qualities, they have rated qualities about the city, they have ticked off certain characteristics that they associate with the city, and they have answered open-ended questions about the soul of their cities. And the first maybe, I think, relevant result is that on this open-ended question, which I don't remember it word by word, but it's something like, what is the soul of your city? 3/4 of the respondents actually put in an answer here, and not a few word answer. So most of them actually have a very wordy, very well-developed kind of answer. They seem to have a strong perception of the soul of their city, which kind of enforces my assumption that it exists. It exists something called the city soul, and people living in a city, they can actually describe this. So that is one thing that is interesting. And another thing that is interesting, referring to the love comparison again, that is this something only in the eyes of the beholder? When you look at the answers, you can see that they are actually saying a lot of the same things about their cities. So if we take Stockholm, for example, this is just one quotation, and if you translate it to English, then it's beautiful, surrounded by water, historical buildings, dynamic and diverse. And this is one example. And if you put all the answers into one bowl and you just count the words, how many words, and you put them on a picture, you have seen these Wordle pictures, word clouds. Actually, this is what turns out. And this is not, I haven't like cleaned it up, so it's a lot of, like and if kind of words. But it's quite clear that from that first quotation, water and beautiful, that's what's coming up in most of the answers. So my conclusion from this is that I should be able to kind of define or describe this city soul, because it seems to be quite coherent, can you say that? Between the different cities. And I haven't done the rest, but I also did a pilot study last spring in 4 other cities, and it was approximately the same conclusion. So that is interesting. Okay, so going a bit deeper then. I mean, water maybe is something that we could say, all of us, if somebody would ask us to guess the soul of Stockholm. And it's also maybe the one that is most branded, most talked about in advertising and so on. But going a bit deeper, studying these, analyzing all the questions about the city, the qualities, the characteristics, all that, I started trying to combine these into components and trying to relate them to the perception that my city has a strong soul. And what comes out is, these are the components. So beautiful urban environment. It's a bit hard to say beautiful because it's also like cozy. In Swedish, mysiga kvarter, for example. So it's not only beautiful, but it's lovely in a sense. And then it's good reputation, so the outside picture of a city. Its vibrant city life has a lot to do with the supply of goods and services, both commercial and public. The symbolic buildings and visible arts come up, the accessible nature. All these that are black seem to be connected to the soul quite strongly. But at least the first 2 undoubtedly is. But the last 2 in gray, easy to get around, which is how easy is it to get around by bicycle or by walking, and governance, safety and service, they seem to be not as connected to the city soul, but still they could be connected to the satisfaction or the loyalty to the city. So what about this beautiful urban environment and good reputation? I have measured 4 cities, and let's see how they score on these different factors. And the blue line here is Stockholm. So the first thing you actually can see then, not very surprisingly, when you live in Stockholm, you must tell me when you live in Göteborg what you think about this. But Stockholm is then perceived as the most city with the most beautiful urban environment, the most vibrant city life, the most accessible nature, and so on. Actually, Stockholm tops on all of these components except for the governance, safety, and service one. And then it doesn't come as quite a surprise that when you look at here, the strong identity and soul, Stockholm also is the city with the strongest perceptions here. What is interesting about this is also so you see that I've used a lot of different concepts to measure here. And identification, it concerns to what degree do you identify with the city, with your fellow citizens, so to speak. And it's very low. So it turns out that you don't, in order to be proud of your city, to be able to recommend your city, to be a loyal citizen, to be satisfied, to see it as a city with a strong soul, you don't need to identify with your fellow citizens. And also try I have also done this on a neighborhood level, and it is still the same result, which is quite interesting. So is this maybe a sign that the city soul and these kind of factors is not so, they are maybe more connected to the physical place than to the other people beside me. Or there could be other explanations. So, and just the last slide here. So the only thing I can really conclude right now, except for asking a lot of questions and hoping for your feedback, is that I think it is relevant. This shows that it is relevant to study city soul from an urban planning perspective. Could go further and do it from an economic perspective as well. And that the urban environment, a beautiful urban environment, and the image and reputation of a city seem to be strongly connected to the soul. And of course, I have to look at a lot of socioeconomic differences. I have to look at a neighborhood level. I have to do a lot of other things in order to get a more comprehensive picture. Thank you.
The concept of attractiveness. It's in your title, and you see and hear it everywhere. Everything should be attractive nowadays. But you didn't talk so much about this. And I see this concept is a very tricky concept.
Really tricky, and that's why I'm avoiding it constantly. But no, it isn't. But I think the only way I can relate to attractiveness in this research is via residential satisfaction. So if you see attractiveness in one way as attracting people to live in the city, keeping people there, wanting to stay there, taking care of the city, then you need to be a happy citizen, so to speak. So in that way, I think I connect it to attractiveness, right now anyway. But could also, I mean, you could also perhaps connect it to real estate prices, for example. See if people living in Östermalm is more, do they think that Östermalm is more soulful? And is that connected to the prices there and so on? But I haven't done that.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah. I could do one of those maps like Louise showed us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Do you in any way relate this to heritage perspectives and developing heritage as a concept in your studies?
Not yet, really, but I mean, symbolic buildings are very, to a large extent, heritage. So I mean, implicitly it's in there, but I haven't really explicitly discussed it yet. But it's an important, of course, and a very important part. And when you talk, for example, when I did the pilot study, Örebro was one of the cities. And there, the castle of Örebro was, of course, the most mentioned thing, the most mentioned word in the soul.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So normally you ask, what is your favorite city? And I would like to ask you, what is your favorite city soul?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it would have to be Istanbul, actually. I think Istanbul has something very, very specific, and it probably has to do with the long history and the clash between the Eastern and the Western, but also they have the cities planned in a fantastically interesting way, and yeah, I think it is.
Very interesting. Thank you again. So you can stay put because you will join the panel, because now it's time for the first panel, and to moderate the discussion, please welcome Mats Berg, who is the Managing Director of Johanneberg Sannis Park. And please also welcome Louise once again, and as well as Greg Morrison from Chalmers, Jonna Bornemark from Södertörns högskola, and Rebecca Engström from Vinnova. And if you could, no you couldn't, well, right, we'll keep track of you anyway, so please, Mats.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Yes, it's on.
Yeah, it's on.
Do you hear me? Thank you, and welcome to this wrap-up session of the first morning part of this. It's not on?
Yes, it is.
Do you hear me? No. Is it on?
Yes.
Thank you. Once again, it's the wrap-up session of this first part of your R&D day, and we are here to discuss a very intriguing question, because if we are going to develop the most sustainable, exciting city in the world, we need to make use of knowledge, and knowledge is produced not only in academia but also in industry. And the key question here today is actually, how can research contribute to sustainable cities? And the key words for me here is how and current research. How is that process? Because research takes a long time. City development takes also a long time. I would like to start with Jonna, to give your views on how does research come into city planning?
Yes,
Yeah.
very short question with a very long answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have 20 minutes all together.
And as I'm part of a research project called Decode, which works with artists and humanists, also I'm a philosopher. So I take this question from a bit different perspective, since I do very different kind of research than the quantitative research. Yeah. And I would say that one part of the research that is very important to make it not only useful but also to make it deeper is not only to do research on city planners and on cities, but also with. So that's kind of my way to do it, to do it together. Right now I'm in a project doing research with city planners.
Right.
And I would say that in ways that could be developed also in the qualitative studies, because what you both talked a lot about, and the questions were on how do we reach the qualitative aspects. Yeah. And that is the tricky question of the soul is a very qualitative question. And so my answer would be then with.
Right. And Louise, you have perhaps both European and American perspective on this.
Yes, but to your question, I think, again, there's no simple answer. It's, so there are aspects of cities that can be planned and engineered to some extent, and aspects that cannot. A lot of what we think of the drive towards sustainability, at least in terms of the use of resources, energy, materials, really is engaged with a lot of research that is both technological, involves the private sector, but also involves the study of sort of flows and exchanges within the city to some extent, but also between cities and sort of the countryside. And now that kind of exchange is global. So there's a lot that can be said about that. What I know, what we do a little bit in our group is to try to understand urban form, energy use, possible scenarios for decarbonization, and in broader scenarios about how you could still consume energy, because it's probably very difficult to imagine cities that consume a lot less energy, though there's some space, of course, for efficiencies. But to think about how these systems of flows can be made in some sense less harmful and perhaps even beneficial from an integrated perspective. So there's a lot of technology and changes that can happen there, particularly also as cities are changing and a lot of their own technologies and infrastructure are turning over. So they have different turnovers, like 50 years for buildings perhaps, or even longer, but for cars maybe 10 years or 20 years. So there are a lot of things that are changing. I think ultimately the things that cannot be planned, to your point, are things that have to do with how people build their socioeconomic lives and how they make sense of them across many facets. And those are aspects that I think are best left open, but at the same time can be supported by governance and technology in order to take all the other things that take time and effort out of the picture.
Yeah. And Mia, you have some 18 years experience from consultancy here at Tyréns before you started your PhD studies, right? And now you have started a topic with a totally different angle. This is not very technical, it is more gut feeling or something else. How do you expect city planners to adopt to your research?
I think actually the answer is quite easy. Or it's not easy, of course, but I think because cities are becoming more and more complex, because we are becoming more and more people in the cities, so we have to relate to much more people, kinds of people and kinds of businesses and kinds of, so in order to understand it, in order to be able to do something, we need to do research, because we can absolutely not rely on our gut feelings, all of us. But I think for urban planners to use kind of my research, I think it's I think they are going to be able to do that because urban planners are also changing and are also being interested in looking at other things, more qualitative things.
And Greg, you have a technical background from technical research, and what do you expect from city planning? How to adopt knowledge created at your groups?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've been working at Chalmers is more from a, you talked about decarbonisation, but also from a more dematerialisation point of view. So we're looking at using the lesser known United Nations report on factor 10 and factor 4, and how can we create in districts, in cities, so that we live by 2050 within our ecological footprint with human well-being. So bringing these things together as a research concept into very real-life issues of sustainable living, sustainable working, sustainable transport. And the way that we're trying to do this at the moment is through a cooperation with Tyréns, with City of Gothenburg, with Castellum, who is a real estate developer, bringing in those sort of practitioners and stakeholders with ourselves in a very defined district where there's a lot of innovation. So for us, it's about creating research that, or understanding how we can create districts which eventually will be within the city. I can come back to it in a minute. I think you can ask further questions on that.
Because I also would like to hear from Rebecca, because she represents the funding, the money from the National Agency for Innovation, how to transform research results into practice. What would you like to see the city planning working together with agencies like yours?
Well, in one word, cooperation. That's the key point in all our financing. Cooperation already from the beginning, from the idea development, to sit down together, the users and the researchers, city planners and the companies involved in the researchers, to sit down together and make up the ideas already from the beginning.
It was not me.
No. And increasingly during the recent years, we have started also to provide grants for actors to sit down together and cooperate to develop the idea already from the beginning, already before you start to do the project.
Right. The question we are here to discuss today is also implying that we think we have more knowledge that is not made use of, really. Do you agree on that one? That you sit on some secret knowledge that we could put out into society, but we don't really get it there. You're nodding, Luis.
No, I think that's true. There are many classic examples. In terms of replanning cities, for example, I showed several photos of sort of the central problem of developing cities, particularly in Asia and in Africa, which is a lot of slum-type informal settlements. And the problem with that sort of environment is that even in the West, we've dealt with it. The knowledge that we thought we had was that we should just basically rebuild these neighborhoods completely. Because, you know, we know how to build industrially at relatively low cost and create physical environments that would be better. But I think we didn't know very much about, if you approach from the perspective of, well, what needs to be created is sort of an open-ended socio-economic process that incorporates people in the city and that leads to development of the city and of specific communities, then that's a very different problem that we've not understood very well. So it's more about the relationship of people's lives in social spaces with infrastructure. Right. And from that perspective, there are many things that we are learning and that we can do now with data, but also with creating synthesis and models that allow very different development trajectories that are much more infrastructure light, that may be resource light, but that maybe also achieve socioeconomic change that's positive faster. Right. And that's basically what one wants to do most of the time, whatever the context. But we've only had sort of blunt, pretty obvious engineering tools to deal with many of these issues, and we tend to often get this wrong in terms of what urban futures and social futures should be possible.
Yeah. Would you make a comment to that?
Yes. I think there's a certain shift in the look upon what knowledge is, because as you said, collaboration would be the key word here, that knowledge is different knowledge in different places. Knowledge is not only produced within the academia, but the tricky thing is when people get more and more specialized, as you showed us, to connect those knowledges, and that will take it into the next level. So the thing is to, and also not only think about knowledge as the quantitative thing, as I
Right.
but to think more broadly about situational knowledge and so on.
Yeah. And Greg, you also...
I disagree.
You usually do.
No, I think that's not enough, actually. What we're trying to do now is, within the district, we have a couple of sort of iconic sort of projects, HSP Living Lab, I see Piabs here, who are involved in it, where there's a lot of business to business. There's also a lot of academia to business and society involved in it. We're also having another Factor 10 building, which we're going to build with Castellum, and we're trying to bring it together. That is, I think, not enough. Some of the things that we're doing now is for the district, we start from Chalmers' side. We have now a key account manager, which is a very strange term for a university. We also have now recruited, with our own finance, a business developer who actually sits with Mats. So we're starting to bring in people who actually can look at the process of going. It's not enough to say we're going to go by sitting together, something's magically going to happen. You need to have an understanding of the process of bringing knowledge from, and it has to be knowledge on the academic terms. So it has to be, it's not enough to say, well, now we're going to do things that are just very applied. It has to be very real knowledge. It has to be world-class research on either European or a global platform. And you have to see how that goes from that academic knowledge to business and hopefully innovation for Europe or for the world. Yeah. So I think that process doesn't just happen on its own. And I think we're trying to do that at the moment.
I think someone will disagree with you.
Oh,
right?
Yes. If I may.
You are most welcome.
What I meant was not only to kind of connect knowledge and that, and just to connect them, but to take them into another level. Because, just for an example, when I let my city planners read philosophical texts, my knowledge come together to their knowledge. I don't have the knowledge about city planning as they do. But together, that knowledge becomes something different. And that's what I mean, to get us together with different kinds of knowledge into a different level, not only looking at what we are studying.
Yeah. And by that is time for this session's first commercial break. That's why we have science parks. You are most welcome to join us, because that is the purpose of mixing that kind of knowledge. Now, back to the panel. You, as a financing agency, when you hear this, do you follow up your specific efforts when you finance projects to see if you really get this kind of output?
Well, yes, we do. Partly, of course, we could do it even better, but we follow our projects quite close and
try to meet them and really discuss with them to see how they develop. And I agree quite a lot with Jonna, what you say. Your project is also funded by us, of course. But what we see in the more long-term cooperation is that you can build up you can reach a new level, because it's not only that the researchers come with the knowledge to the city planners. The city planners have their view of their challenges that they stand for, long-term and shorter term. But in cooperation with the researchers, they can get an increased knowledge of their challenges, and also the researchers can get an increased knowledge of what is interesting to study. Yeah. So you can reach together, take new steps together.
Yeah. Do you think cities, and I mostly mean Swedish cities in general, could they work a little bit faster in the process of adopting new knowledge into city planning and city development?
Of course they can, but the cities, you also have to remember that the cities have certain tasks that they have to fulfill. They have to provide certain services to the citizens. They have to follow different rules and laws and so on. So you can't do everything so fast. It has to take time also. Yeah. But of course you can speed up your capacity to work with innovation, of course. And we support, for example, 5 innovation platforms for sustainable, attractive cities, where we try to help with
exactly that. We have one in Gothenburg.
Yes, you have one in Gothenburg.
Yes, we do. And there's one here in Stockholm also. Do you see that there are things missing in the process of taking this academic, mostly academic research, into practice at the moment, or could we do something better with this?
May I jump in?
Yes, you do.
I think it's the nature of thinking about cities and social systems that we're not generally short of ideas. There are lots of ideas. There have always been many ideas. what is often missing is the space to try out things in practice and the means to really evaluate them, not in crass ways, but in real ways, often over the long term, to see if you really are producing good results. So a lot of what you just said is that, you know, the world of policy tends to be very quickly on political timescales, you know, has its own criteria for success, which may not be the ideal ones. The world of research, on the other hand, has long horizons, somewhat more abstract goals to be reached. And the challenge really is to find ways to bridge these worlds such that you do maintain the quality and pursuit of truth of research, but you also start affecting sort of what's happening on the ground consistently, and you can evaluate over long terms. This is generally very difficult because, as you were saying, you're dealing with organizations that work very differently, that need to deliver every day for yesterday almost, versus organizations that really don't have a lot of interest in doing this. So, and also just at a practical level, the ability to evaluate interventions and knowledge in ways that are more rigorous, but also allow you to basically to learn, so that local governments, but perhaps integrated with researchers or some, can actually learn what is working, what is not working, and why. So
but this is actually happening at the moment.
It is happening.
I mean,
the district say not very well. I mean, it's getting better, but...
Well, the districts we work in, we have one in Gothenburg, but we also have London, Berlin, Utrecht, Paris. It's 6, can't remember the last one. But there is the same process going on. So we're starting to learn from each other how to work in this way. And but I think we mustn't sort of go from a very low starting point and assume that academics don't work with. A lot of the people who are at town planning are people who've actually come from Chalmers, and it isn't a very big bridge to gap, actually, to jump over. I don't see this as very problematic, actually. And I think we can move ahead very quickly and start to create very specific sustainable districts that can then be replicated either in refurbishment of the bigger areas that we have the challenge in the next 10, 20 years, or in terms of new areas where we want to show that we can do things differently. I think it's very possible. I don't think it's such a big step, actually.
So maybe in Sweden's different. I don't know Sweden, but in certainly in the United States and in most cities I know throughout the world, this is a major issue. I mean, there are some exceptions. We were talking a little bit about New York. Under Bloomberg, he was a strong mayor who didn't care about being elected and who was rich anyway. So he did many things that he could do. And New York is, you know, full of all kinds of capacity that you can bring to the fore. But in most cities, it's really very hard for a city to know what the state of the art in technology or possibilities are. It's very difficult to go from R&D to the second D, which is demonstration. How is it that you actually try something which has a more abstract set of concepts behind it in practice, and evaluate it yourself over? So you need money, you need capacity, you need analytics, and that's very hard for most cities to do
at the city scale.
Yes, so you need to have something that integrates that knowledge, and perhaps you're doing that very well in Sweden, I don't know. But throughout the world, this is a major issue, and it's more even of an issue as cities and urban environments are changing very quickly. So when you go away from the developed world and you start going to other places where the need is really there, which, you know, is where our sustainability of the world is going to be win or loss, there's really no capacity, and there has to be new forms.
I totally agree with you. The speed of development will increase tremendously, especially for with the undeveloped world. Mia, you had a comment.
Yeah, I can only talk for KTH, of course, but I agree with you. But I also think it's another end of the problem is the academia is afraid to lose some kind of academic integrity if they sit too much in the lap of business. Life. Sure. So I think it's a double problem in a way. But I think it's interesting now that I am in both quarters, so to speak, and it's interesting to see that clients actually become, I think, increasingly interested in well-grounded research. So even though they still, I mean, the ones I meet have a hard time adjusting their time limit, their time agenda. So they're still like interested. They want to have this well-grounded research, but I think it's a little bit of a double problem, both in the academia and the.
Do we have time for one or two questions from the audience, or one question? There's one. It's about lunchtime.
My name is Nikara. I'm an architect and urban designer working in municipality in Stockholm. And I'm just going to talk about something that is not oftenly discussed when it comes to the relationship or connection between the academic world and the reality. I think compared to the technical world, which has got a direct connection between the knowledge or the research and the reality, what is built, which has got a strong connection, what is like being researched is we can see the direct result. But in urban planning, there is still a huge gap between these two worlds, and I think it is mostly depends on that. Urban planning is pretty much a political issue. So urban planners from one side and the researcher or the academic world from other side, they don't have power like over the whole process. And we could see like easily the situation in Sweden. I mean, the most like obvious example of like sustainable or effort for making sustainable cities in Malmö was like Western Harbor, and in Stockholm was Hammarby Sjöstad. Those two like how to say incredibly good examples of sustainable cities were not directly a result of the efforts of urban planners and other like expertise in the area. That was mainly a political ambition, a political vision that like the politicians just made this decision that they should be prioritized, they should be financed.
We understand the question, so should we let the panel to answer it?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I just wanted to say it's called democracy. I think we should be happy that it's not only scientific expertise and bureaucracy that together make the city. I mean, there should be, that's one of the most important qualitative questions to develop right now, is the democracy aspect, that it's not in the hand totally of the planners and the researchers.
I didn't say that it is bad or good. I say that they have been down like a little on these political side. I mean, we have, for example, the housing minister that is focused on like producing the housing. We don't have like urban planning minister. I mean, these issues like should be more prioritized. I think that in a political world, that's. That was my point.
I think you have a point there, and I think it's time to conclude for lunch. Let's thank the panel with a big hand.